So Heather, take us through the last part of your trip. You ended up coming back to Canada.
Yeah, so we got into Canada, I think, at the beginning of June, and we crossed into Canada from the States. So what we did was we were in the UK and England, and we flew into New York City, and then we got a car, and we drove all around Washington, Maryland, Philadelphia, Maine, right up to New Brunswick. So we actually crossed into Canada in St. Stephen's in New Brunswick, and it was shockingly emotional to come home. I really enjoyed the year away, and it really surprised me how emotional we were at the border. I mean, the kids actually had to answer the border guards' questions because I was in tears and their father was misty, and it was quite a scene.
Oh, well, I can imagine. I mean, did you find that the year went by quickly? Did you really savor every moment?
It was both. I really did savor every moment, and I was very almost hyper aware because I was doing the blogging and chatting with you and chatting with others online and on TV and so on. So I was really hyper aware of the moments that I was in, and I don't feel like I lost that. But at the same time, it's so strange to be now sitting in my office in my home, where I've sat in my office in my home before I went away, and to think back on all that we've gone through. Because what I'm finding really interesting over the course of this year is that, you think back on your own year, and it's really difficult to pull out sort of all the exciting things you probably did last year or all the interesting moments you had. And I'm finding that same thing now for us, except that, when I think back on them, there's some crazy, crazy moments, and so there are times when things start to flutter a little bit out of control here, where I just sort of step outside, close my eyes, and think back to, India or Portugal or China or wherever. I just, crack a joke with my kids about something that we remember or something, just to try to keep it fresh.
Now, and it's a great thing that you have all those memories to go back to, and it'll be interesting to know how long you'll keep thinking about it, and obviously your children as well, being younger. But having lived basically a nomadic lifestyle for the last year, what has the transition been like coming back to, like you said, your home, your office, your bed, your surroundings?
Very confusing. Everybody seemed to think that we would be so desperately homesick. Don't you crave your bed? Don't you crave, your home and what have you? And really, I didn't. It was surprising to me when we pulled into the driveway here. My youngest, Cameron, jumped out of the car. My parents had come to my house and decorated it. So there was a welcome home sign and balloons and all kinds of stuff. And when we pulled up, Cameron didn't even wait for the car to come to a complete stop. He jumped out, he ran to them, and he burst into tears. And I realized just how much emotion he'd had over missing them. But at the same time, he and Ethan both have, since we've been back, have just sort of jumped right back into life. They call on their friends, the doorbell's ringing all the time. I'm now the popsicle and juice box queen. I have juice boxes and popsicles for the entire street at any given time.
We're coming over, Heather.
Sorry?
We're coming over.
There's enough for everyone, believe me. It's probably the only thing I have in abundance in the house right now. But yeah, so the kids had no problem. They readjusted really quickly. I'm really struggling with it. And it's not so much that I'm, feel a burning desire to jump up and go again. But I'm just hyper aware, I think, of how it felt to be away and what I gave up in terms of stress and daily living and some of the things that we put on ourselves, the stressors we put on ourselves. I'd let that go. And I can see them sort of around the corner trying to get back into my life. So it's a little more stressful for me, I think.
Now, I find that particularly interesting because I recall, one of our conversations, it was one of the ones in the beginning where you said that you, by nature, are not the easiest person to adapt to new situations. So, what does that say about the fact that you were able to adapt and now you're back? I find that really interesting.
Well, it's really changed my perspective of what it means to be on vacation. Because I'm realizing that all those times when we just go, and I know this is going to be devastating to some people to think about, but when we just go for a week or we just go for a weekend, are we really getting a vacation out of it? Are we really getting what we need out of a vacation? Because it took me, I'd say, a few months probably to really settle in and sort of get used to being in this mode of, although, yes, I was working, but in this mode of not being as stressed and on that sort of 9 to 5 fixed type schedule that I'm on at home. And so, yes, what happened to me is because I was living on the road, that became a way of life for me. And now this actually feels more like, an adjustment.
Now, let me ask you this. We've talked about how the trip has impacted you. How do you think it has changed, if at all, your two boys?
Oh, dramatically changed them. They're still, the same happy kids they were before they left, all of that. But their points of reference are very different. If you talk to my kids about any given subject, and the thing is, this is true of anybody. If I asked you, if we started talking about lunch, your point of reference for whether this lunch was good or not, or what you'd like to have, would be probably in reference to the things you'd most recently experienced. I had a great lunch last week at such and such a place. All of their points of reference are to the last year, mainly, and all of those happened in the most phenomenal places in the world. So just in terms of their conversations, even with their friends and on the street, I see that coming through. Also, their confidence is much higher. My little one was shy before we left, and that's completely gone. And they speak about travel as something that is just natural. When can we go again? Was the question from the backseat the other day, which just sent my husband and I into tear-producing laughter.
I was going to ask you, did your selective hearing not kick in there? Like you didn't hear that?
Except that I'd like to go too.
Oh.
But yeah, for now, I think we've got some work to do at home.
Yeah.
But,
well, and it's
they
interesting.
have changed, but they're also kids who have throughout this year adapted to whatever circumstances they were given. And the same has been true at home. The only thing we've had to watch them for is exhaustion, because I'm realizing that being home has actually, we're all a little more tired than we expected, and the kids don't necessarily recognize that in themselves.
In many ways, you could argue that those two little boys have the biggest transition to undergo going back to school. Goodness gracious, I should mention this so far ahead of time, but in a couple of months, because they haven't been at school per se in what we know as school for the last year. However, learning so much in that past year. What are your thoughts around that as they look at that in the next couple of months?
Well, I'm feeling that because they've adjusted to everything so naturally and surprised me with that I think school's going to be no different. What we did do is when we came back, we were back a day before school finished. And so we went into the school because I knew that they were missing their friends. And at the age that they are, kids didn't have email and that before they left. And I thought it would be great for them to see them before the summer holidays so that it wasn't such a shock in September. And it was great. They spent about 40 minutes or so on the playground with the kids at lunch and had a great reunion with some of their buddies. And I can see that part of it is not going to be an issue. However, them going and sitting in a desk in September, we'll have to see. What we're doing over the summer is they're in French immersion. So they're doing some French tutoring, and they're also going to attend a French summer camp and to sort of get their language up to speed. But I'm really not too worried about the scholastic part of it. I'm only thinking in terms of concern, it would be just to watch them in how they adjust to having to sit at a desk. I'm lucky that their teachers are very supportive. And in fact, some of them have kept in touch with us over the year. And so I know that they're aware of the struggles that these kids might face when they get there.
What a great idea, and how smart it was for you to take them back to school just before it ended, because you're right, that would just sort of, soften the shock.
Yeah, and I think for their friends as well, right? Because there were kids who were like, where were you?
We only just noticed. Yeah. What advice, you know, obviously the average family is not going to have the opportunity to, you know, take a trip like you guys did for a year around the world, but what tips and advice could you offer to families who may be considering something like this, or a longer trip, or just the average vacation?
Do it. Go now, drop everything. Seriously, I really feel strongly after this that we've got to carve out the time that we need to get what we need out of these things. And so yes, if all you can do is a week's vacation, then make it as, you know, substantial and as able to give you what you need as you can. I think that the longer you can be away, I would rather take, after this experience, I would rather see, you know, a 2 or 3 week block of time than a few days here, a few days there. If you can make that happen, I think that you really do need time both to let go of the stress of home and time to account for time that you might need as you're approaching home again. And I just think a week doesn't do that, and you don't get a chance to actually unwind and relax in these places if you haven't done that. I'd also encourage people to go farther. You know, stop thinking of a vacation as just crossing the border or just going to Florida or the things that you know. There's so much value to be had in meeting people from around the world and in exploring some of these destinations. Forget what you're seeing on CNN. Really, forget it. Talk to people who live there. Go and see what it's like, and talk to people here who are from some of these places. You know, one of the real benefits that I've gotten out of this year is that when we meet people here who are from some of the places where we've been, there's an immediate second level of intimacy, if that makes sense, because they're just so happy that somebody's been to their homeland and, you know, has seen it and isn't coming at it from a perspective that was completely media driven. So I think it will could make a huge difference in the planet even, you know, but at least in your own lives and the lives of your kids, if you go a little further.